Hi everyone, I'm Kyle Dyer and welcome to Colorado Inside Out on this Friday, November the 8th. We've had a few days to process the outcomes of our election and now we are here to discuss what has transpired and what is next for our local communities, our state, and our country. Welcome to Patty Calhoun, founder and editor of Westward, as well as Eric Sonderman, columnist for Colorado Politics and the Colorado Springs and Denver Gazettes, Elena Alvarez, reporter with Axios Denver, and Chris Rourke, consultant with Rourke Media. Colorado came in second place to Minnesota when it comes to voter turnout on Tuesday. Kamala Harris won Colorado, but not by as big of a margin as Joe Biden had 4 years ago. Lauren Boebert won the CD4, but not by as big of a margin Ken Buck had 2 years ago. The counting in CD8 has lasted for days. Panel, what are some of the races that stand out to you this week? What are some of the messages we can read from some of these outcomes? Patty, I'll start with you.
Last week, I predicted we wouldn't know the answer at this point, so I was very wrong on that. You can take anything I say with many grains of salt. But it was astonishing how quickly Trump did roll up the rest of the country. But Colorado was very predictable. We stayed blue. The red wave is lapping at our borders, but Colorado is definitely a Democratic state. Dems are in power in the state legislature. Kamala won by 11 points. It might not be as much as Joe Biden won by, but given how quickly she had to run that campaign, I don't think it's a big surprise. So even as the snow is trapping everyone in Colorado, we feel a little bit isolated now, that we are kind of a progressive, or I would like to say kinder, gentler state than much of the rest of the country. And we're going to see what happens as that red wave continues to lap at our borders.
Colorado has gone from, the days of being maybe periwinkle blue, then we went to cobalt blue. We're now full navy blue. We'll see what happens in that 8th congressional district. Caraveo and Evans, at least the mud bath is over, and there was an incredible mud bath. My gut tells me it's probably going to end up right where it was 2 years ago. All that money, and Caraveo is going to prevail by 1,000, 2,000 votes. Could be wrong. It could flip. And then Boebert, you talk about audacity. The move she made a little after Christmas last year to switch congressional districts from the western side of the state to the eastern side of the state, and we were all rolling our eyes, and with a little help from too many Republican egos who wouldn't get out of the way and unite behind one in the primary, she pulled it off.
Almost every national storyline that we saw play out wasn't true in Colorado. We saw 71% of states shift Republican. Meanwhile, my team found that Colorado had the smallest shift in the nation toward President-elect Trump. It also bucked nationwide trends when it comes to Latinos who fueled Trump's victory. In Colorado, however, Latinos backed Dems in key races. So the state, really solidified its status as a blue island in a red sea, and that's a phrase that you're going to keep hearing. And hearing from experts, they really explain this by a few factors. One is Colorado's demographics are changing. 2, it's one of the most educated and one of the least religious states in the country. And 3, we're also home to a very affluent population. So all of that kind of helped us get where we are. That's not to say that the GOP didn't see some gains. We saw 34% of the state's counties shift more Republican. And just look at CD8, that race, we have the incumbent Democratic U.S. Rep. Yadira Caraveo, barely ahead right now against Republican Gabe Evans. I think the bottom line here, though, is that as the Democratic Party takes a moment to really reflect and rethink its strategy, which is obviously very needed at this moment, it's going to be looking to the states for leadership and inspiration. And I think Colorado, specifically Governor Jared Polis, who hasn't ruled out a 2028 presidential bid, could provide a sort of unique model for the party moving forward.
Okay, all right. Chris.
Well, keying off of what Eric said about Boebert's audacity, I have a different perspective of how she won that race. And the key was her campaign manager, Drew Sexton. He ran on a campaign where she had come out of some very controversial events that happened in her life. And he launched this campaign of get to know the real Lauren Boebert. I attended a couple of events over the course of her campaign after the primary. really strong candidate in Tricia Calvarisi, but she came off at these meetings as being more down to earth. Her attire changed. She talked more about policy, and people really warmed up to that idea. It was interesting, for a while she was well behind in Douglas County, which is a Republican stronghold. I'm not sure if it was so much her or if it was that Douglas County is showing signs of going purple. Bob Marshall won another term in the legislature. Amendment 79 passed there, and Trump did not win by the big margins that they expected him to. So keep an eye on that.
I just can't let Boebert go unassailed here. Even if she looked like the PTA president, to refer to what Elena said, there's a rural population here in Colorado that's poorer, that their interests are not represented. And by her going in and taking 4, she removed the chance of someone who really knows what the Eastern Plains is like, what they need, the ranchers, the farmers. And now they're not represented because she jumped in her PTA president garb.
To Chris's point about Douglas County, I think that's the real story in this state, and it has been for a few years, is that the Republican strongholds are no longer Republican strongholds. Douglas County is, very purple, more or less a 50-50 county at this point. If you look at where Democrats, the only place Democrats tipped a state Senate seat, flipped a state Senate seat, that was in El Paso County. El Paso County is no longer, it might be a 3-point Republican advantage, but you're not going to win statewide elections with only getting a 3-point bump out of El Paso. You need the old days of 20 points. Those days are gone.
Okay. When you look at all of the ballot measures, we decided Coloradans were kind of all over the place. Voters backed protecting abortion rights and gay marriage, but also backed conservative measures like increasing funding for law enforcement and saying no to animal rights measures. What surprised you the most, panel? Let's start with you, Eric.
I think the most notable for me, as we've talked around this table, we're, I think, maybe done, we can only hope, with ballot box biology, as we have referred to it. I think the Wolf experience has soured enough people, caused enough voter regret, that they're much more suspicious now of these measures. The ban on hunting bobcats, lynx, mountain lions went down big. In Denver, the fur ban and getting rid of the lone slaughterhouse in town also went down big. I thought the most interesting one, probably the most consequential one of the night, was the defeat of Proposition 131. That was truly going to overhaul the state's election process. And then there's also some commentary about Amendment 80, the school choice amendment. I think this is a state that believes in school choice, witness the popularity of charters, but that was a campaign of folly. They didn't even bring their sort of core base aboard. I've commented earlier that the risk reward was out of whack. They spent a bunch of money getting it on the ballot and then didn't really have any money to run a campaign on its behalf.
We've been really focused on 2R, Mayor Mike Johnston's proposal to raise taxes for affordable housing. Now, he hasn't conceded yet, but this measure has been down by about 7,000 votes for days, and it's pretty likely that it's going to fail. But it's notable because Denver voters love to tax themselves. They always say yes to taxes. In fact, they've raised their own rates by 30%, at least since 2018. But here they really drew a line and proved a lot of people right who were very worried that, yes, affordable housing is a priority, but when you put it on the ballot with the other tax hike proposal for Denver Health, which did pass, it lowers its chances and it puts them in competition. Mayor Mike Johnson this whole time has denied that would be the case, but here we are. It's a major blow, not only because it's his first measure that he's put on the ballot, but also he, had, I think back on when he announced this, he had a whole army behind him and was just so confident. So I'll be really curious to see if he takes, another stab at this, if he decides to put this thing back on the ballot next year. If he does, if he lowers the rate, or if he'll go a totally different route. So we'll be watching that really closely. But for now, the fact that he hasn't conceded is also kind of interesting.
And with that, this ballot initiative was definitely rushed. And anytime an initiative is rushed, it's likely to fail. You have to build that case, and I don't think he did that. I agree with Eric on the wolf issue completely. If there's any gift in the reintroduction of wolves to Colorado, it's that it showed the Colorado voter that when you mess with ballot box biology, it might not turn out like you think. So I think that's definitely a gift there. And then Proposition 129 narrowly passed. I know there was some opposition to it. This is the initiative that creates veterinary professional associates to provide veterinary care for animals. Opponents said it will lessen the quality of veterinary care. In rural areas, veterinary care is essential with livestock and so many things, and it's hard to get veterinarians to come to rural areas. I think this is a solution that will prove itself in time, and some veterinary care is better than none. So.
Okay. All right.
You have to enjoy the fact that one of the 3 wolves that has been killed since they were reintroduced was taken down by a mountain lion, which just kind of brings everything full circle on this ballot box biology. But I do think we are going to not see that here again for a while. The slaughterhouse ban, the fur ban, those were both slaughtered by, I think, discriminating voters. And that's what's interesting about not just Denver voters, but Coloradans. Looking at how they voted on these measures, you can see they really thought carefully about all these issues. They may or may not have agreed, but you couldn't just say they voted one party, they voted the other party. I was right. I did say 2R was going down. I do think it's still going to go down. Too complicated, too vague, too last second. And 131 also way too complicated. People know the election system needs to be repaired, especially if you look at the Colorado Republican Party and what's going on with primaries, but they weren't ready for the ranked choice voting part. So Colorado's voters, as you look through how all those motions went, they really know how to pick and choose, and they want a better state, and they can figure out how to get it there.
Let's talk about the election process in general in Colorado. We are not hearing the kind of allegations of fraud this week compared to last. And Elena, let's start with you, because you have reported on how Coloradans, no matter what political affiliation they are, do approve of our state's mail-in voting process.
That's true. So I know we're all tired of polls, but I'm going to talk about a poll this week, an exit poll from the Colorado Polling Institute. It showed a sweeping 87% of Colorado voters are pleased with the election system. It's highest, the satisfaction levels are highest among Democrats at 99%, which is kind of wild, but it's up 72% for Republicans. And hearing pollsters talk about this yesterday, I mean, they called it astounding, this level of widespread approval. Going back to Proposition 131, something that I think is interesting, seeing this poll and trying to really figure out why Prop 131 failed. It could be part of this, that voters really are happy with the way that things are currently run. I'll say one more thing about Prop 131 that just surprised me, because so much money went into this ballot measure. It was over $15 million for the pro campaign. They were drawing money from billionaires from out of state, Chevron, and it just goes to show that money isn't everything. They lost resoundingly.
Yeah, in several races within Colorado and nationwide, I was kind of comforted to see that big money doesn't necessarily guarantee a win. So, and that is an example of that. Interesting with the ballot situation and the passwords on the voting machines with Jenna Griswald. Westward had an amazing article called The Reign of Error of Jenna Griswald, and there's been a lot of reporting on multiple mistakes that she has made in the course of her tenure. And all it's done is heighten anxiety surrounding our election integrity. And Colorado does have a proven system, and yet these mistakes make voters kind of go, I'm not so sure. And those who have denied the election, it just throws gasoline on that fire, heightening anxiety. I think it is time for there to be consideration of her no longer doing that job, but I think that really takes her out of a run for governor. So.
All right, the reign of error.
Yes, that was my headline. Here's the thing about the revelation that she waited 5 days after she learned of it to tell the county clerks. Here are these people who had to run an election. They were in the middle of it. They find out from the Colorado Republican Party, which sends out a press release, that their secret passwords have been leaked. That's a horrible way to put confidence in your people. So, and you could also see that Governor Polis was very upset, even though he didn't say it. He immediately stepped in last Thursday, got the troops out so they could go change all the passwords. But we could have been Tuesday night, it could have been a very different outcome. If Donald Trump had lost this election, we would be hearing about the big lie. We'd be hearing election deniers. We'd be hearing once again how Colorado's system is rigged, one of Donald Trump's favorite things to say about Colorado. And Jenna Griswald would have given him ammo with what she'd done. So Colorado stepped in quickly to get rid of the damage. I don't think no one's going to say this election was rigged, at least not from the Colorado Republican Party.
Mm-hmm. Eric.
First of all, kudos to Hannah Metzger and to Patty at Westward. There was an excellent piece on her quote-unquote reign of error. She was not going to step down right before the election, maybe shouldn't with the election, given that this all happened on election eve. But talk about mishandling and bungling a crisis. Mistakes happen. There was a mistake within her office. Fine, it happens. It's how you respond to that mistake that matters. And she responded in one of the worst ways you could by trying to paper it over, cover it up, not be fully transparent, not disclose it, not share it with the county clerks, not share it with the governor. It is time now, with the election in the rearview mirror, for her to step aside, particularly if she intends to run for governor, which is the worst kept secret in the state. She should not be presiding 2 years from now over the counting of her own election results.
And I think the quick arrest this week of those 2 women in Mesa County shows, don't mess with the system, you're going to get caught.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Especially in Mesa County.
Yeah.
Tina Peters land.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, what can Coloradans expect with the new administration that has promised so much change? We've heard President-elect Trump talk about Operation Aurora, and now the largest mass deportation in our country's history is focusing on our city here in Aurora. There are a lot of things that I think a lot of people here, Chris, are like, what's going to happen? What do you see happening in Colorado with the new administration in charge?
I'm of the age where I look more at actions rather than words, and I also believe in our country's checks and balances. And you can say, well, the House is going to be Republican controlled, the Senate's going to be Republican controlled. How can you talk about checks and balances? The fact of the matter is, in another 2 years, we have a midterm election. And if something goes awry, if there is overcorrection, if that's what we're looking at here, as Americans and as Coloradans, we have the opportunity to redirect again with the midterm elections. Americans said that they want change, and they voted for change, so we'll just have to see what happens. I'm not all gloom and doom. In the words of Joe Biden, it's going to be okay.
All right, Patty.
Well, I'm sorry to have to follow Little Mary's Sunshine, but I think we are going to see Operation Aurora start pretty quickly. I was at Trump's rally covering it in October, and he stayed more on point than I've ever seen him at a speech about the threat from immigration, the Venezuelan gangs, that he was going to start that the day he takes office. And there already are reports that he is starting up the plans for mass deportation. So I think we'll see it, and I think we'll see Aurora made an example of. There's no love lost between Mike Coffman, even though he's a Republican, and Donald Trump. So we're going to see a lot of action here in Colorado. I think we're also going to see problems with federal lands. I think even though Colorado, there is plenty of energy work done in this country. If you look at it, we're producing a lot of oil. I think we're going to see more of that. So environmentally, we're going to have to keep a close eye on this state we love so much because it's so beautiful, keeping it beautiful.
Okay. All right. Eric.
To your question of what the Trump victory means for Colorado, I equate it to, the wolf being back at our door. We are a deeply blue state in a very red country, in a country now that will be run without a whole lot of checks and balances. Yes, their institutional checks and balances are still there, but in terms of people, there is no one. Donald Trump reigns supreme over that Republican Party now. I'd love to believe what Chris says is right, that we're all going to be okay. I'm not a terribly partisan person. And yes, Chris is correct that we will have an election in 2 years and another one in 4 years, God willing. And those can be corrective elections. But I think Colorado's going to be with its neck exposed here as a blue state, and whether it's about the Space Command, Lord knows about deportations with an eye on Aurora, a whole host of other issues, funding and otherwise, there's going to be a burden on our Republican members of Congress, including Lauren Boebert, but I'm particularly thinking of the two new Jeffs, Jeff Crank and Jeff Hurd, to try to represent the state and try to put a damper on some of the president's worst instincts.
There is no question that Trump's presidency is going to have major consequences in Colorado. Immigration has already been mentioned. We have immigrant advocates who are already bracing. I listened to a Denver Public Schools board meeting yesterday and heard a member telling families that they were going to do the board was going to do everything that they can to protect immigrant students and families. The U.S. Space Force is a real thing, and I talked to Colorado Springs Mayor Yemi Mobolade just a couple of weeks ago, and he, before the election obviously was decided, he was already talking to Trump's team to try and smooth relations over and hopefully prevent that move from happening. Whether he's successful, I don't know. But I think there will also be some real winners. Patty sort of mentioned this on the flip side. She's talking about environmental impacts, and that could mean real wins for the oil and gas industry. Trump is obviously very pro drilling, especially on public lands, and then there's also the tech industry. There's a reason why people like Elon Musk and other tech leaders in Silicon Valley have lined up behind Trump. They think he's going to be light on regulations when it comes to crypto and AI, and they think he's going to be great for small startups in the tech industry. So it's not, as Chris said, it's not all doom and gloom for everybody, but no doubt there's going to be major consequences, probably quicker than we even know.
Okay.
Well, and to Eric's point, checks and balances are not just the legislature or what surrounds our government. It's the fourth estate. This was a great analysis of what's going to be good, what's not going to be so good. And so I really believe that the fourth estate and that the American people will keep this in check.
Let's talk about some of the lows and the highs. Let's start with the low point so we can end on a positive note. Patty.
Elena mentioned the DPS meeting last night, and it is not just immigration that's going to be an issue in the schools, but we have 10 schools set for partial or total closure in Denver. We've got very upset families. The revelation of which schools they were going to be was, in a very cynical move, postponed till after the bond vote. So there is now only 2 weeks for these people, these families, to be heard before the DPS must finalize. And that was a cynical move that was not worthy of Denver.
Mm-hmm. Eric.
And to Patty's point quickly, now the superintendent is going to be out of the country for a good chunk of those 2 weeks on some boondoggle trip. So even while there's comment, he's not going to be around to hear it. My disgrace is way too strong, but my negative, you really have to put some responsibility on the back of President Biden here. His administration will go down as a history books as a brief interim between two Donald Trump terms, an interim marked by high inflation produced by an overly generous stimulus package, at least in part, a disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, and then him not holding to his word of being a transitional figure, but holding on to the office way too long before stepping aside belatedly and post-due.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We mentioned the two women who were caught for fraudulently casting their ballots, which is a low in itself. But something that I think got kind of missed was actually 3 of those ballots that they did fraudulently cast were counted. They weren't caught. And so I think it just gives more fuel, as you were talking about, the election deniers on top of the Jenna Griswald password leak. It just gives more fuel and to distrust the process.
Well, I don't know if mine's negative or positive depending on what side of the aisle or what your views are, but Douglas County, going back there, quite a bit of infighting among Republicans down there, almost a microcosm of what we see in the state. The DC GOP, Douglas County GOP endorsing one Republican over another, in contested races. There's been some infighting among Douglas County commissioners again. I think the divisiveness is really going hand in hand with that county turning purple, going maybe perhaps blue. So I think there needs to be some analysis there among Republicans.
Okay. All right, let's talk about something good.
Well, Donald Trump has called the people who've been charged in connection with the actions on January 6th, 2021, he's called them patriots. Let's talk about the true patriots, the veterans who we will be celebrating on Monday. Let's remember the people who are really fighting for this country.
Thank you, Patty.
Right on, Patty. Well said. I'll just say something nice and thank you to our viewers who stay with this program, who use it certainly not as their only source of election news, but as a source of commentary and perspective, and who let us run our mouths here on a weekly basis. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
I'm grateful that pundits' predictions, including Patty, no offense, that we might not know the results, the presidential results for days, potentially even weeks, did not come true. It was really nice to not be stuck in like election limbo land and to have some clarity quickly.
Okay.
Well, and me being little Miss Mary Sunshine, I'm really thankful for the snow. I know it's messy, I know it's a pain, but at least I won't be back in January complaining that we haven't had any snow. It's essential to water in Colorado and the world. And then finally, 43 monkeys have escaped from a South Carolina research facility. They were all young females, had not had testing performed on them. They carry no disease. They're warning the public, stay away from them, but I'm kind of cheering for the monkeys.
All right, good. All right. My high is that there's been an acceptance of election results. There's also grace and humility. I really appreciate the consistent speech from Kamala Harris on Wednesday, in which she said, "The light of America's promise will always burn bright." Before we know it, we will have new lawmakers in place, representing all of us here locally, statewide, federally. So here's to the promise. Here is to the work ahead. Here is to working together within all of our different communities in our state to make Colorado even stronger. Happy Veterans Day, as Patty mentioned. Thank you, insiders, for joining us on this important week and in this snow. Thank you for watching or listening to our podcast. Take good care, Colorado. I'll see you next week here on PBS 12.
PBS 12 believes in the power of original, local programming. Help us bring more shows, like the one you just watched, by donating at pbs12.org/program support today.